So today we're going to start with the first unit called the scientific method, in which you have at least topics, subtopics like introduction to research in hospital management, applications in hospital management, and what is called research process. So I'll close this window and then we'll straight get into the PowerPoint. So before we start with the topic, I wish to draw your attention to the qualities of a good researcher. So what I'll do, I'll start with the slideshow. Before that, I'll also record this so that offline also we can have one backup. So I'll start with the recording of the slideshow. So simultaneously we can have two backups, one on the YouTube and the other in my hard disk. So what are the qualities of a good researcher? Now, in my opinion, every management scholar or every manager is expected to be a good researcher. And then what are the qualities of a good researcher? If you knew whether you have these qualities, you could be a good researcher. If you are a good researcher, you can always be a good manager. So as with that note, we will slowly move into the qualities. Now, as I've already briefly told you about what is called the Unit 1. In Unit 1, you have topics like scientific method, then introduction to research in hospital management, what are the applications in hospital management, and then the process of research. So these are the four subtopics that we will see, which means what we can do is we can have about four sessions of classes on Unit 1. So if you can have four contact classes, I'm sure Unit 1 is through. So I think in that order, we will gradually move. So Unit 1 you'll have four classes. Unit 2 will gradually have three or four classes likewise until we move on. So that's how we would move. So let's start with what are the qualities of a good researcher. Now, we always have this superlative called good. So what does it mean? Good always means having the right and proper qualities. So I'm also making it more narrative in this slide so that uh, since we don't have face-to-face contact, if you have face-to-face contact, the message would be more clearer. But owing to the lockdown situation, nobody expected that this is something like a black swan. If anybody is familiar with this word, black swan, the improbable events in the history are called black swans. So COVID-19 is a sort of a black swan, and its impact is highly unexpected all across the world. So anyway, we will not talk much about it because enough everybody is talking about this virus, and then 24 hours a day on all social media, on all your print media, press media, and then the televisions, you will hear a lot of this virus and then information about. So everybody is becoming highly educated on this virus anyway. Still, we don't have any clues about what is this virus, how does it operate, can we really find a medicine or not. Anyway, so let's move on. What are the good qualities of a manager? If you possess these good qualities, it you can predict success in your life. That's what, as a researcher, you should anticipate. So good qualities would result in success. And then if you're a successful researcher, you could always be a good manager, because researchers make decisions using uh, researchers initiate outputs or data which results in information, and that can be used by managers for their decision making. So researchers always give inputs to the managers. So here, in case you are a manager as well as a researcher. So now as we move slowly, you can even reflect upon what should be the qualities of a good researcher. Now, visualize a researcher in a laboratory. How does he look like? Those are all physical characteristics, like he would have a white apron, gray hair, grown hair, doesn't bother to have a shave or a haircut for long, long time. And then, is very shabby. The surroundings are very shabby. But fine, he has something on his mind or her mind, wants to invent something or wants to find something where nobody had done it before. So that's the characteristic of a researcher. Here you can see some of the characteristics I have listed out, and then I'll also tell you where you can find these characteristics. Probably in a classroom, if I would ask you, you can also list out all the characteristics. But what we can do right now, you can identify what are the characteristics of researcher which are not mentioned in my presentation. For example, researchers are very intelligent people, and of course they are very honest. They have nothing to hide. They always want to show to the world what is that they found. And these people are very, very curious. They always have that inquisitiveness to know. That's what I would say, curiosity. Curiosity, say, as a popular saying goes, kills the cat. Curiosity kills the cat. You can see that, the cat doesn't move off from a what is that called, the rat hole. Until the rat comes out of the hole, the cat would be standing there for days and days. Even it would go on hunger, but it wouldn't come out. I mean, it wouldn't move from that rat hole. That's what we call the curiosity. So it might kill the cat, but cat doesn't give up. So that's the quality of a researcher. You should never give up on what you're trying to pursue, particularly the understanding. Now these people are also highly initiative, so they don't lay back. They keep moving forward. Then they have enough knowledge. They're very good in oral and written communications, because a researcher has to convey his message or her message to the whole world. Without oral and written communications, it's very, very difficult. Now, further, researchers are highly critical in their analysis. So they don't give up. They will be very, very elaborate, step by step, one by one, all the strands, all the steps they analyze and present their what is there on their mind. They're also very logical. That means when they present any ideas, they have some sound basis, some scientific basis. Of course, they also are expected to have common sense. I don't agree with this, but particularly I'm mentioning that because we normally say that we are expected to have common sense, but I refute that. I'll try to prove it in one of the classes. Now, uh, if you're intelligent, but if you are not curious and initiate problems and are not understood reasonably. So, what I'm trying to say from this third point is, you might be intelligent, but if you're not curious, you may not address your problem and you may not understand it probably, or you may not understand it properly. And that's the problem with those who are not very curious, might be intelligent. That's what today you will find people around the world. So, let me summarize very quickly what are these characteristics. Now, researchers are diligent. That means they are hard-working people. You can see that researchers or scientists across the world, 24 hours a day they are locked down inside their laboratories conducting research on this virus called what is it called, coronavirus. Nobody would understand the dynamics of this virus, because I heard the director of CCMB very recently giving a what you call talk on this virus. Now this gentleman says that this virus is mutating very fast, and also its nature is changing from country to country. What is the virus that you find in China is not the same in India as well as in those western countries like Europe, Italy, Spain. The virus strands in Italy and Spain are very, very deadly, as much as it is so deadlier in United States. But that's what they say. When it came to India, it has become very, very recessive. I don't know, that's what he was telling. That so if you really want to generate or develop vaccines or medicines, you need to understand the strands of all these countries. That's impossible. Bringing all the strands of different countries together and conduct a research so that you would know what are the variations in each of these strands is a very, very difficult task. So I don't think we will have the vaccine or the medicines in the near future. That's what same thing happened to even SARS and MERS also. So what I'm trying to say, they are diligent, no doubt. They are very persistent, very creative, they're very innovative, very objective, open minded, very orderly, that means very disciplined, very clean. Of course, that's a big question. Very cautious, because they'll be very careful when they are making any presentations. Nobody can claim that they have the vaccine today on this virus. Then, accuracy and precision when they present any material. They are very quick and very responsive. They are very, very keen in their observations. They are extremely systematic and reasonable in their presentations. And of course, they are very cooperative and they take the leadership, because people are willing to listen to anybody who wants to talk about COVID authoritatively. People would like to listen to them. So that's how I would summarize the qualities of a good researcher. So if you have some qualities, why don't you list them out? Or you can even put them in the chat box, or you can put them down in your notes, and then subsequently we can deliberate upon those qualities. But if you would ask me to summarize all these qualities, the most important quality of a researcher is inquisitiveness. If all these qualities have to be summarized in one word, I would say inquisitiveness is the most important quality of any researcher. Why? Because inquisitiveness also is closer to the word curiosity. So if you have passion for knowing something, that I would call as inquisitiveness. Passion for inquiring, passion for knowing something which is not known before, or passion for exploring something which nobody had explored before. That's what I would call inquisitiveness. If you have one of this quality as one important, I'm sure rest of all the qualities will fall in place. So that's how I would try to summarize for of course, that's how I would conclude with the qualities of a good researcher. Maybe we can even explore some more, like, personally how they look like. You go to various libraries, of course, Sleepless. They do extensive work on internet, gather huge data. They conduct a lot of experiments. Then, of course, they are not born overnight. They are made. It's a process. In the long run, they emerge as good researchers. So, for more information about the qualities of a good researcher, I found there is a link on the internet. Right, this link, I leave it to you. You can always copy that link and then search on the internet, because since the last 10 years, I am seeing this link being the topmost link when you search for the qualities of a good researcher. So, which means since the last 10 years, nobody else had written any material on the qualities of a good researcher than this particular web page. So a lot of elaboration is there. You can always read through, because some of them I have already culled from this site and pasted them in this PowerPoint file. So with that, we will discontinue this topic called the qualities of a good researcher. If you still have any more qualities on your mind, you can list them out. So I'll go to the chat box to check through if you have anything on your mind. Maybe a few minutes we can explore. Any other quality you think is very important for a researcher, good researcher, apart from the qualities that we had already listed out? If you have anything on your mind, you can put them in the live chat. Otherwise, what we'll do, we'll move on to the next topic. So fine. So I'll discontinue this topic. We will move on to the next one. Fine. So let's move on to why one should do research. So this is going to be our next sub thing. Why research matters. Having seen what are the qualities of a good researcher, why research matters the most for us. Now, I made some elaborate points here. Why one should be willing to do research, or why we should show interest in doing it. So let's step by step move into those points. First point is research includes many ways researchers systematically study anything to understand them better. So if you want to know anything in this world and to understand it better, you have to conduct research. Now, if you really want to uncover new information about any nagging problem or explain why things happen as they happen, I think you have to do research. No other way. Of course, research is called incremental, which means we are adding step by step, one by one. It's also called cumulative. So research is not once in a while. Research is something called systematically, continuously done, and we are adding to the body of knowledge step by step, one by one. And therefore, it requires continual testing, retesting, debate, and then finally you use certain sound research methods and principles to understand the world better. So what makes research methods so important for us is it helps us to see the inner workings of how knowledge is created in this world. I'm sure very much information is being generated today on this virus. Massive. Lot of journals are publishing, pumping huge information on this research because that's very hot today, hot topic across the world. So Lancet, then the Nature, these are the journals which are bringing out huge information on this virus. Of course, occasionally I'm tracking this journal publications. They're doing a lot of work on particularly the medicines. Now, last week there was an article in Lancet on there's a new drug that they have tried out. Now they are recommending, even Donald Trump is recommending that antiviral drug. So now slowly what's happening, the focus from chloroquine is moving on to another retroviral drug, antiretroviral drug. So, but unfortunately, Lancet claims another publication saying that that drug is not really effective, but already it is being pumped, it is being what you call publicized more. So now there is a controversy whether chloroquine would be continuously used or will be phased out. So now this is what uh, if research methods are not seriously taken or not used seriously, the errors published also would be now implemented by the doctors. Now doctors will follow the protocol, treatment protocols based on what Lancet published. Now it's going to be more disastrous if it happens. So we need lot of information on these kind of workings. So, and that's the reason research methods are so important. Next point, why research matters the most for us. Now, historically, if you see across the world, there were a lot of cases on incorrect beliefs. Now, why Galileo was killed, why Copernicus was killed, why Socrates was killed. They were all true actually, but the people of their time thought that these people were liars, they were traitors. Why? Because they didn't have enough knowledge, they didn't have enough scientific understanding. But those people were ahead of their time who were talking about the truth. So, what I'm trying to say is that incorrect beliefs will be challenged by the application of sound research methods. Subsequently, people realized that they were the right, their answers were right, but it was too late. So, once upon a time, that's what we thought, that Earth was flat, but we know that today Earth is not flat. But they've rejected when someone says Earth is not flat, because people thought it is flat of that time. So researchers are discredited for certain good work, but unfortunately after their death only people realized that the mistake that they were making. Another interesting, Aristotle thought that the heart, not the brain, controlled sensation and movement. Of course, he never dissected human bodies. He drew the wrong conclusions about the purpose of human organs. But today we know that sensation happens in the brain, not in the heart. Of course, we are not underscoring the importance of heart, whether feelings happen in the heart or the brain. These are all very challenging questions in research. So, why we are doing research is to explore, describe, understand, explain, evaluate, or predict something about the world that is happening around us. Research is all about inquiry. And then it's important to understand that you don't always find what you expect. You might be doing some research with some purpose, but eventually you end up finding something else. That's what happened in case of Alexander Fleming. He was investigating bacteria, but he discovered accidentally what is called penicillin, and that's a wonder drug. Of course, it doesn't work on some people today. So, but that was a great invention. Of course, it's an accidental invention through research. So, but still, we don't underscore the outcomes of that sort. So, some discoveries actually end up regretting that they made their discoveries. Is like Alfred Nobel is a great man who invented what is called dynamite, but he knew that it is going to be a disaster for the whole world, and he regretted. So sometimes researchers regret for what they have invented, but we see that Albert Einstein also did that, right? Invention of atomic bomb, because he did a lot of research on atoms, right? So he expressed a deep remorse over how his work was used. So research always contributes to something good, but people might misuse it. That's what happened historically with so many cases. So research does matter a lot for all of us. It helps us to be open to both the expected and unexpected outcomes. You might have answers, but don't expect that your answers are going to be counted by the research. Don't expect them to be confirmed. You might have some preconceived idea, but what happens when the research counters your preconceived ideas? Probably that could be the truth, and your preconceived ideas were wrong. So, to reject your preconceived ideas which are considered to be wrong by the research, research does matter a lot for all of us. So, the fundamental principle of research is you never set out to prove yourself correct. So, we always say that my idea is right. Your idea could be wrong also, and research only can prove it. For example, I want you to subsequently, after some time, go to YouTube and search for Dr. Timothy Noakes' testimony. He is a sports medicine doctor, he's a professor actually, and then he made open confessions about the medicine and the way medical colleges teach their curriculum to the students. And he found that there's a lot of misled information that had resulted in the what you call the epidemiological consequences across the world, particularly obesity and diabetes, is because of the wrong education that uh, medical graduates were imparted with. And then he wrote a book, and then he himself said that I am sorry, I made a mistake in that book. So very rarely you will find doctors making confessions about their own mistakes. I think that's a good quality of a researcher. You should be willing to reject your own ideas after some time when the research says your ideas are not true ideas. So it's human nature to believe a study that confirms your existing beliefs. So you might have some existing belief, but you expect that research also should support such beliefs. But your belief could be very wrong. That's what we said in historically. People were killed because you were always confirming to your existing belief, and some of their researches were counter to your existing beliefs. For example, in a village there's a lot of deaths occurring, and the elder of the village would say that the deaths are occurring because the goddess of this village is unhappy. That's a belief, that's an existing belief. Whereas you, as a scholar, researcher, want to present an idea saying that this is a false belief. People are dying because of cholera or because of infections like COVID and so on. The elder of that village would not accept you, they reject you. Probably they would kill you or they would banish you from that village. But you know that you held the truth, you found the truth. But it's a very costly affair to present the truth to anybody. That's why research is a very, very important method. And then research is based on what is called the scientific method. So that's how our connectivity to the topic called scientific method. So the origins of the scientific method can be traced back to Aristotle and great scientists like Francis Bacon. and then Isaac Newton. These are some of the important people who have contributed greatly to the concept called scientific method. So that's how we would uh, come to the end of the topic called uh, why does research matter? Today, you know how important it is in the context of this virus which is so rapidly spreading. And I have a question to all of you. If you can reflect upon this question and then come out with an answer in our next session, probably it will be meaningful. My question to all of you is that viruses do not have life. Everybody knows about them. They are sometimes also called technically exosomes. When a virus doesn't have life, how does it replicate in human body? Because a cell should have life. I know some of you might have an immediate answer that our living cells have what you call uh, doors open to the receptors. So why the receptors are opening doors to this virus, and then why all our living cells are being infected by this virus? It's basically using what is called the copying machine of the living cell. A virus which doesn't have life is very intelligent, but whereas a living cell which is having life is not intelligent. So would anybody throw light on this concept? A virus which doesn't have life is very intelligent, injecting its RNA material into the cell, whereas cell is a living creature, it has life in it, it has a copying machine, it can replicate, which is opening the doors to this stranger, but not intelligent enough to detect that it is unexpected, uninvited stranger. Why is it so? That's what the whole world scientists are struggling. They really don't know how to close doors to the receptors. They do not know how to reject this virus. They do not know how to enable the living cell which can reject the virus. But they only found that chloroquine and then zinc could help in inhibiting the copy machine. So replication of the virus in the cell does not happen in the presence of chloroquine. But chloroquine is not the cure. Chloroquine is not the medicine. It is only inhibiting the replication of the living cell when in the presence of the virus. I think you can explore more information about this because in real time you are having a lot of challenging opportunities to understand how research is happening on this virus. This virus doesn't die because it doesn't have life. This virus cannot live because it doesn't have life. But how does it replicate? It is infecting human cells, and human cells are becoming like the virus cells. So, what medicine can cure this? If any medicine is invented, they will kill all the human cells. So, can medicine be invented on this? Can you believe in vaccines? Do you think vaccine can be the answer? Or do you believe that enhancing your immune system is the answer? Yeah, these are the two possible solutions that you have today across the world. One line of doctors will say that enhance the immune system. Another line of doctor says no, we need the treatment, we need the drugs, we need vaccines. And there's one gentleman who's pushing the vaccine agenda more vigorously across the world, and he's pumping billions of dollars in making vaccines. So find out answers to all of these nagging questions. So with that, what we can do, we will slowly move into the concept of scientific method. So in order to know the concept of scientific method, what I would do, I will close this slide and then we'll move into another. Probably I can extend this slide. Yeah. So what I'll do here, I would start with a new theme called sources of knowledge. I hope it is visible to you. There are four sources of knowledge. First one, traditions. Second one, experiences. Third one, common sense. And the last one is science. So I wish you would understand these are the four sources of knowledge in any society, whether they are called the West or in the East, whether educated or not so educated. People would depend on these four sources of knowledge for understanding any of their problems. Any of their problems. Sometimes we commit errors in depending on certain sources which are not genuine sources or reliable sources. For example, why there is a huge death rate in Italy, Spain, than in other parts of the world? Were they using some traditions, or were they using some experiences, or were they using some common sense instead of using science? So let's slowly move into each of these sources, and then in the next class I will elaborate more on this. In the meantime, I would advise you to, since you have plenty of time at your disposal because of the lockdown, uh, on YouTube there could be a movie possibility uh, called The Fiddler on the Roof. I will draw the link in the chat box. Fiddler on the Roof. Explore the movie name. It's a quite old movie, very interesting movie. Complete movie was shot in a small village, and then it's a very very popular movie. These movies are basically shown in universities or IIMs once. Students are expected to see this movie because this movie is all about traditions. Everybody in a village called, I'm not able to quickly recollect the name. Antovka, I think that's the name of the village in that movie. It's been a very very long time I had watched that movie. It's called Antovka. It's a small village in Israel back in 50s, I suppose. This movie was shot, and then in that movie you would see people would have traditions for everything that they do, right from the morning they wake up until they go to bed. Whatever they do, they have some traditions. So without traditions they cannot live. Our lives will be very very shaky if we don't follow traditions. But the question is tradition the reliable source of knowledge? I leave it to you because I'm not going to react on that now. Maybe what we can do, we can take short break, 5 minutes break, and if you have your refreshments or you can have some coffee, you can come back, we can elaborate more on them. So before that, let's quickly review what are they. Traditions are all about our historical practices. Traditions are all about our religious practices. Traditions are all about our cultural practices. Traditions are all about our belief systems. They are all about our feelings. They are all about our sentiments. Traditions are all about how people lived in the past. When there was a problem in the past, how did they approach that problem? How did they solve that problem? Let us also follow the same approach. That's called tradition. They might have succeeded or not, but still it's a tradition. So that's very, very important. Like same example I would again quote. If the goddess of the village is unhappy, deaths occur in a village. So what is the tradition? You better sacrifice a goat to appease or pacify the goddess of the village. That's a tradition. You would explain people that it is not correct. You're just killing an innocent animal. By simply killing an animal, goddess wouldn't be happy. And in the question, in the first place, why goddess is unhappy? This cannot be answered by the tradition because traditions have limitations. You are simply supposed to follow them. You are not supposed to question them. So that's the peculiarity of this word tradition. You are not supposed to question the elders when they say do what I say. You're not supposed to question them. For example, Swamijis. Whatever they say, you are supposed to follow. You are not supposed to question Swamijis or Babas or Ammas. You find a lot of them today in this country, and they're all going abroad also now. So, because they have answers to every problem, but those answers are not reliable answers. If you question them, how reliable are they? They banish you, they boycott you, they throw you out of the gallery, or they throw you out of the audience. We are not supposed to put any questions in traditions because traditions are extremely rigid. Of course, I also believe in traditions like the tradition of respecting elders, the tradition of doing namaskar to the elders, the traditional clothes which reflect upon the sense of identity that we have in this country. They are very important. Traditions are very important, but we are not supposed to question the traditions because you doubt sometimes whether these traditions are really true. So similarly, experiences is the second source of knowledge. Experiences are called subjective realization of one's own understanding. It's a subjective realization. That means I have experience in something, therefore I think I'm an authority. But whether your experiences are really reliable or not, whether they really work in one place or not, is a big question. That's the reason today you have seen most of the people across the world have failed. Many doctors today have failed in treating the COVID patients because they depended on their experience. They depended on certain traditions of treatment. They didn't know what kind of antiviral drugs would work. So they tried their own experiences. They tried their own traditional understanding. They might have acquired their understanding 60 years ago, 40 years ago. It's no longer working. So what I'm trying to say, experience is a subjective realization, subjective expression of one's own ideas of past. They may not work today, and that's the reason we are not able to find any cure to this virus because experiences are so poor. My experience in one workplace may not work in another workplace. For example, I worked in hospitals earlier. They are not working, they are not helping me today in the current workplace because current workplace is not a hospital. Even if it's hospital, it may not work. It worked in one hospital, it may not work in another hospital. My experience at corporate hospital may not work in a government hospital. My experience at government hospital may not work in corporate hospital. Why? Because experiences are not reliable source of knowledge. They won't help me to understand the problems. Nobody anticipated that this virus is going to spread so rapidly. because you never had such experiences, so you cannot depend on your experiences. 100 years ago you had pandemic like this, but that was different. This is different, and nobody's there to tell you how to handle those kind of pandemics. 100 years of experience. So therefore experience is also not the real reliable source of knowledge. With that we move on to the third one called common sense. Common sense is the third source of knowledge. Now you might be wondering whether I should have common sense or not. If you knew the meaning of common sense, then I'm sure uh, you would take a stand whether to accept it or reject it. So let me explain you what is called common sense. Common sense equals traditions plus experiences. And now you can react on that. Common sense equals traditions plus experiences. People might say that don't you have common sense? And then we take it to heart. We react to that. What nonsense you're talking. That's the next reaction. But you know that traditions and experiences are not reliable sources of knowledge for understanding today's problems. Even for that sake, even in the past, they couldn't understand the problems better with their own sources. So, therefore, common sense. You can have some refreshments, you can have your coffee, you can have your tea. I'm having some water. Okay, so let's get back to what is called scientific method or science. If it's okay with you, you can just say, give your feedback whether we can move or take some more time. So in the previous session, we were talking about the sources of knowledge, and there are four sources of knowledge in this universe, namely traditions, experiences, common sense, and science. We have already gone through what are they, particularly traditions, experience, and common sense. The first three are not reliable sources of knowledge. That doesn't mean that we are underscoring those three things. They are not sufficient enough to explain us the cause and effect of any problem in this world. They are not sufficient, but they can answer. They can give for any question. Traditions will have answers. For any questions, experiences will have answers. For any questions, people say, "Don't you have common sense?" It is so simple. That's what they easily say that. But they are not reliable because when you raise certain questions, they cannot defend themselves, and they react. They take it personally. Differences emerge, conflicts emerge. People fight. That's the problem with the first three sources. Whereas in science, we don't have that. So let's move on to what is called science. So I'm opening a new slide now called scientific method. So I'll try to record this video also so that for secondary backup also we can have this. So let's start with it. So now we are moving to the last source of knowledge called scientific method, which is superior to the other sources of knowledge. So what I'll do, we already started with the first three sources in which people are very subjective. That means they try to know the world around themselves very subjectively and they try to rub it on the others. But that's not a reliable source. We need something called objective way of knowing the world around us. Objective means acceptable to the whole world. And that's why you have two methods called epistemology and methodology. Epistemology is a philosophy of knowing. So, in all the four sources, people use epistemologies. They have their own philosophies of knowing things. In traditions, people have their own religious ways of knowing, cultural ways of knowing, historical ways of knowing, geographical ways of knowing things. So, they have their own philosophy of knowing things. Religious people will use religious scriptures to explain. Atheists will give their own explanations, more scientific they think, but they are not. Whereas methodology is an approach to knowing which is more subjective. So we heavily depend on the methodology rather than mere epistemologies. Of course, methodology is also an epistemology. So very quickly, what we will do, we'll try. This is a standard question: how do we know the world? We would know the world, but the way world is considered as a planet, which includes civilizations. We would know the world being a physical world, but there is also, yeah, whether you agree it or not, there is a physical world as well as a spiritual world. Physical world deals with physical phenomena, spiritual world deals with spiritual phenomena. Unfortunately, what we do when we are trying to explain physical world, we use spiritual phenomena. That's what Swamijis and Babas do that. While explaining physical world, they use spiritual phenomena principles of spiritual world. And in spiritual world, they use physical phenomena. That's why they are confused. Because they are using their own epistemologies to understand these two worlds. And some of us may not accept the second world called spiritual world. So, very quickly, summarizing now, traditions, experience, common sense, and science. Now, these are the four sources the whole world depends on, but unknowingly they are depending more on traditions, experience, and common sense. First three are known as very arbitrary sources. That means very, very personal. People use their own free will to use those sources. Why? Because it supports their ego, it supports their lifestyle. Why people reject truth? They reject truth because it disturbs their lifestyle. So that's why to support their lifestyle, they justify their sources of knowledge. So unfortunate. People live in their own blinded world because the epistemologies that they have adopted to understand the phenomena supports their lifestyle. If someone wants to live a bad life, he justifies his bad life using his own epistemology. And that's the reason, even if you present truth to the atheists, they don't accept truth because it disturbs their lifestyle. So, though they don't appear authoritative, people still depend on the first three sources. So, now here I was talking about that movie called The Fiddler on the Roof. So, the name of the village is called Antevka. That's the name of the village. For everything, they have traditions: how to eat, how to sleep, how to wear clothes. So, for everything, they have traditions. So, how important traditions are? They are very important, but they are not the source of knowledge. They are good to practice, good to observe. For example, in our state, we follow a lot of festivals, and you all participate in those festivals. They are called state festivals. You enjoy participating in them. They are just festivals to practice, but they should not be considered as the source of knowledge. The minute you extend it towards that, you are making mistakes. Without traditions, our lives would be as shaky as a fiddler on the roof. That's the name of the movie. Fiddler is someone who plays fiddle. This in this movie you would find a fiddler always playing his fiddle on the roof of his house. So that's how the movie always starts. It's a very interesting movie. You must all watch it. So therefore, let's move on to the next one called experience as a source of knowledge. It's personal, as I told you, it's personal realization. It's because you have your own eyewitnesses doesn't mean that your source of knowledge is a reliable source of knowledge. For example, if I say that I have seen the spirits in the dark, that is my personal realization. But I cannot rub it on the whole world saying that there are spirits everywhere around. I cannot prove it, but I can only say that I have experienced it. So that's the problem with the experience. It's your individual subjective epistemology. It may not be objective. So even if 10 people say that they have seen the spirit, still those 10 people's uh, epistemologies are very, very subjective. Even if 100 people say that they have seen the spirits in the dark, still it is considered as subjective. What I mean is, simultaneously, if all 100 people see the spirit, it becomes objective. It doesn't happen. Of course, in movies they show it. Four or five fellows would see an evil spirit or a lady in white sari moving around making noise. If all of them see, that becomes objective, but that's only in movies. In reality, in real life, you will never find those kind of examples. So therefore, we reject experience, but still in the time of interview, we give importance to experienced people, unfortunately. And I've seen experienced people failing across the world in top-notch companies. So we were talking about how weak is our common sense concept. It's as I told you, it's an explanation. It's a summation of tradition and experience. What is it? It's practical judgments based on your personal experiences, personal understanding, personal bias. That's what we say. Prejudices are bias. Like all Pakistanis are bad. That's called prejudice. All Chinese are bad. That's called prejudice. All Indians are good. That's called prejudice. All religious people are good. That's called prejudice. So these are all common sense illustrations. practical judgments based on experiences is called common sense. We assume that people make good decisions based on common sense, but across the world they have failed because common sense doesn't help you because it's tradition and experience. So with that, I have a particularly mentioning the importance of science from the beginning because this topic is all about scientific method and research follows scientific method. So in scientific method, we emphasize more on objective knowledge, and that's why science is very objective. Your understanding about the world around you could be very, very objective and also very systematic. That means step by step you can explain. For example, if you want to explain this universe, you can explain. This universe is composed of so many galaxies, and only one galaxy in which we are living, Earth, is part of that galaxy. How many planets are there? You can explain that very, very systematically. For several years, we knew that there were only 9 planets, but objectively, we've searched, we found that Pluto disappeared, so we have only 8 planets. Subsequently, 4 more new planets were found, so totally we have about 12, 13 planets today. But that's a big question. If 12, 13 planets are there, what should they do in all the temples where at the entrance of the temple you will find only 9 planets or Navagrahas? Our almanac, a Hindu almanac, is based on Navagrahas, whereas there are more than 9 planets in this universe, in this galaxy, particularly invented, and we have names for those all 4 new planets they were found. And Pluto is not visible. Did it disappeared? Where did it go? Nobody knows. So what would happen to the ninth planet or ninth graha or Navagraha? So we have these challenges. If you raise this question to a Swamiji or a priest, he will shout at you. He will throw you out of the temple because it disturbs his existence. That's the problem with the science. Science disturbs people who depend on traditions and experiences. So therefore, science refers to the accumulated body. That means for several years it is accumulated. It's an accumulated body of knowledge that results from scientific inquiry. Though it is imperfect and limited, but superior to the other 3 sources. Now, why do we say imperfect or limited? You cannot have all explanations given by science. For example, it couldn't still find the cure to AIDS. It couldn't still find the cure to many other modern diseases, particularly lifestyle diseases, you call them, or degenerative diseases. For that matter, we didn't find any cure for any ailments today. For blood pressure, you don't have a cure. For diabetes, you don't have a cure. For cancer, you don't have a cure. Though we have advanced our understanding, though we have developed so much sophisticated knowledge about these viruses, but still you don't have the cure. In fact, in modern medicine, you don't have cure. We know that. And that's the reason they only manage the disease. They only manage the functions of the body, vitals of the body. Science can better explain gravitational force, but it cannot show where is it. Science can explain that there is wind, but it cannot prove that. It cannot show where is it. So it cannot even produce a drop of blood. It has its own limitations, no doubt about it. But there is no other superior source of knowing the world around us as much as science does. And that's why we rely more on science rather than the other sources, other 3 sources put together. We called it common sense. So in this slide, I'm just trying to make some comparisons about what is called common sense and what is called scientific sense. We rely on common sense because common sense is not reliable source of knowledge. In common sense, we observe things inaccurately. whereas in scientific sense we consciously observe things around us. In common sense we generalize from very few cases, whereas in scientific sense we generalize based on large samples. In common sense we observe selectively because we want to see what we like to see, whereas in scientific sense we very consciously decide what to see and how to see them. In common sense, when there is a gap, we try to fill the gap with our own understanding. If you don't have enough data, you fill the data with your own explanations. Whereas in scientific sense, you base your conclusions always on certain evidences. In common sense, you believe in luck, whereas in scientific sense, you depend upon documentation and backup. And by the way, luck is not a tangible phenomena. It's not available anywhere in the world. If it's available, everybody would have purchased it, even at a premium price. The opposite of a word luck is called pluck. The dictionary meaning of the word pluck is hard work. So those who depend on luck, they are not hard workers. They're waiting for a lottery ticket. They don't work hard. Whereas the opposite of pluck is working very hard. In common sense, people get personally and emotionally involved. You question them, they go mad. Whereas in scientific sense, we respect certain scientific norms regardless of opinion. Nobody gets hurt because you are expecting a scientific explanation. So personally, nobody is involved in with their egos in it. In common sense, the views are formed prematurely. There is no revision made. Like as I told you, very recently Lancet made a conclusion in their one of their research publications that uh, hydroxychloroquine is not a better alternative. And most of the doctors would read these kind of articles. So they made a revision now. This week they made a revision. Now they have published it. So, and there are other research articles from other countries. So I will try to put those links subsequently. Research, that is research publications made on this virus in international journals of repute, and they are making mistakes. So, in common sense, you simply say something we just cannot know. Certain things, when you don't know, you say that we just cannot know. Whereas in science, you cannot rule out any area unknown. You can still explore the possibility of knowing it. So, therefore, science is more conscious than common sense. It's more conscious than common sense. It's more careful than most common sense way of knowing things. So, now we have come to the understanding of how the other three sources of knowledge are not very dependable. Let's move on more elaborately into why science. If you are familiar with the features of the science as a source of knowledge, I'm sure you will more uh, openly absorb and embrace the concept of science and start applying its characteristics in all areas of your problem solving. Because as a manager, your job is to solve the problems and emerge with some decisions. So therefore, let's quickly move into the characteristics of science. First one, it's empirical. Very important characteristic of science is empirical, which means you can always have an observation. Directly you can observe the phenomenon under study. You can generate data. That's the beauty of science. In traditions, you cannot prove it. In experiences, you cannot prove it. In common sense, you cannot have it. That's the beauty of science. And science is very systematic, which means any procedure, any method that you follow is very organized and it is recognized across the world. So, therefore, science is step by step and acceptable. Third important characteristic of science is called replication. So what do you mean by replication? You can repeat the same study. For example, if chloroquine is working in Indian COVID patients, you can see whether it is working in Pakistani COVID patients or Chinese COVID patients or American COVID patients. So it can prove it. So it can reproduce the same level of treatment outcomes, or it can produce the same research outcomes. That's the beauty of what we call replication as a characteristic of science. Now, the fourth one is called deterministic. I like this characteristic because science can understand that this whole world is in an order. There are galaxies, sun, there is moon, there are stars, there are planets, all are orbiting in their own orbits for thousands of years. That's called the order. There are seasons. All seasons are in orders in a cyclical fashion. They come one after the other. Summer, winter, rainy season, they're all ordered in their own way. So science can understand when this order is likely to happen again. It can also understand when is it going to be summer. It can also understand when is it going to be winter. It can also understand when it is going to be the rainy season. So that's how the seasons are so understood by science because of the characteristic called deterministic. Everything in this world is orderly. Now, this is another important characteristic of science called provisional. Any conclusion that you give is only temporary. Any explanation that you give to any problem is called tentative or provisional or temporary. It can always be questioned. You can always reject that. So that's what we call in science. You have this very beautiful characteristic called provisional explanations, whereas in traditions you cannot have. You cannot say that this is temporary. In traditions, you say, that's it. Do what I say. We must sacrifice an animal. That's it. There's no other way. So there's no scope for these characteristics in other sources. Now, science, as we repeatedly keep saying, it is bias free and it gives a lot of importance to being open, acceptable to all forms of ideas emerging from all sources until you have the final conclusion. So that's the beauty of what we call objectivity. So therefore, what we do, we refute common sense because the science's way of knowing things is far superior to others' way of knowing. The others we are referring to tradition, experience, and common sense. So these are all what we reject. And by the way, there's one more important characteristic. Uh, I have purposefully not mentioned that. You can guess. You can even put it in the chat box if you can find. Very important characteristic of science which I have not mentioned purposefully. Can anybody explore that? I'll go back to that slide again. It is very empirical, systematic. Replication is possible in science. You can understand what is called order in this universe. Everything is ordered in this world. Like age is ordered in this world. Time is ordered in this world. Any problem can be explained with only provisional explanations. It's very objective, so acceptable to everybody. Most important characteristic which I have not mentioned is called prediction. We can also mention it here called prediction. I'll write it down so that it can go into our slides forever. I don't think I can do it probably. Yeah. So we can always predict the cause and effect relationships in science, but not in the other three sources of knowledge. We cannot predict. It is very empirical, systematic. Replication is possible in science. You can understand what is called. I hope we are through with the characteristics of science. So let's move slowly into what is the purpose of science. Important characteristic. Uh, I have purposefully not mentioned that. You can get. So what are the purposes of science? First one, it concerns the expansion of knowledge and the discovery of truth. It helps in building theory. And then what is theory? It is a set of interrelated propositions or statements. I will explain them in one of the classes more elaborately. Let's not worry about it now. But the purpose of science is to expand the knowledge and discover the truth. That's more highlighting point. And the key elements we have already seen called, of course, we have not seen them. The key elements in science is called prepositions. We make statements and then we try to establish in each statement what is called cause and effect. This will happen in one of the classes more elaborately. So science depends on two systems called inductive system and deductive system. In inductive system, science helps in introducing new evidence of the theory. Whereas in deductive systems, you move from already existing evidences and build upon more evidences from one evidence to the other evidence. That's what we call deductive system. So science depends on these two concepts. They are also called logics actually, inductive logic and deductive logic. So let's not more worry more about them, because in one of the classes we will explain them more elaborately. But these are also components of what we call science. So what we will do, we will stop here, and then if you have any questions, we can raise them in the chat box or even you can email them to me. So in the next class, what we will do, we'll try to see the concept of logic, because that is the centrality of research. Without logic, it's very difficult to understand what is called science. So if you are not able to build upon the concept of logic, you cannot conduct research. At the same time, you cannot generate very reliable output of your research work. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, you can raise them. And then tomorrow, uh, we will have an early class, probably in the morning. I'll also discuss with Dr. Ramesh and find out whether we can have an early session so that uh, we can have it more tight and controlled. I'm also doing this live streaming for the first time. I wanted to do either Zoom or otherwise Microsoft Teams or Google Meet, but those technologies are very intimidating in the sense, if power flows, if current goes off, the entire recording goes off. Whereas in this streaming, at least I have a backup on my laptop. Even if failure happens, I would still have a backup on my laptop. Whereas in case of those other three sources, by the way, people say that it's not reliable to work with Zoom for a lot of piracy issues. So therefore, privacy issues are also there. We can even try the other services like Microsoft Teams. We can try that. We can even try Google Team, but I'm not sure how good are they, because I have not tried them, because they're also in the beta mode, because Microsoft Teams failed when Parliament wanted to use it. Then Google Meet also couldn't succeed. So because they're all evolving, nobody anticipated this lockdown. So all those technologies are still evolving. Maybe after a few more months, those technologies will be in place. But I'm depending more on YouTube streaming because this is very reliable. For several years, it is in the service. Of course, I'm using it for the first time. Otherwise, earlier I've uploaded a lot of videos, premiered them, but this is the first time I'm doing what we call the live broadcast. So there are a lot of hiccups, I can understand that, I'm sure, but we will gradually overcome them because I am also learning these new technologies for my given age and background. With all limited resources, I'm struggling, but it's worth learning because this is going to be the order of the future. We will have more of online courses, online classes. Everybody will live online.